There is something unsettling about watching two people describe their religious upbringing in completely different organizations, using completely different vocabulary, referencing completely different authority figures, and yet telling what sounds like the exact same story. One grew up in a kingdom hall, surrounded by images of paradise earth and warnings about Armageddon. The other grew up attending sacrament meetings, learning about temple covenants and the plan of salvation. One was taught to call their leaders the faithful and discreet slave. The other was taught to sustain prophets and apostles with raised hands. One was told that Jehovah's organization is the only ark of salvation. The other was told that the restored church holds the keys to exaltation. And yet, when you sit them down and ask them to describe what it felt like to doubt, what it felt like to ask forbidden questions, what it felt like to imagine leaving, they use almost identical language. They describe the same knot in their stomach, the same fear of losing everyone they love, the same guilt for simply wondering if something might not be true, the same panic at the idea of researching their own religion from outside sources. How is that possible? How can two organizations with such different theologies, different histories, different public reputations, produce such remarkably similar emotional experiences in their members? The answer is not complicated, but it is deeply uncomfortable for anyone still inside these systems. The answer is that both organizations, despite their surface differences, operate on the same underlying fear architecture. They use the same psychological mechanisms. They install the same mental locks. They train the same reflexes. And they produce the same result: members who stay not because they have been genuinely convinced, but because they have been systematically trained to be afraid of what happens if they leave. Today, I am going to walk you through that architecture. Not to attack individuals, not to mock sincere believers, not to pretend that everyone inside these organizations is stupid or malicious. Most people inside these systems are good people doing what they genuinely believe is right. That is precisely what makes this so important to understand. Good people can be trapped by bad systems. Intelligent people can be manipulated by sophisticated control mechanisms. Loving families can be torn apart by institutional policies they never consciously chose. This is not about insulting your grandmother who has been a faithful witness for 60 years. This is not about mocking your neighbor who serves in his LDS bishopric with genuine kindness. This is about recognizing a pattern that transcends any individual, a pattern that exists at the structural level, a pattern that explains why so many people from such different backgrounds describe such similar experiences of fear, guilt, and psychological captivity. If you have ever wondered why it feels so hard to leave certain religions even when you no longer believe, this documentary will give you the answer. If you have ever wondered why some religious communities seem so warm on the inside but so hostile toward anyone who questions them, you are about to understand the mechanism. And if you are currently inside one of these systems, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety just from watching this video, I want you to know that your reaction is not evidence that your religion is true. Your reaction is evidence that the conditioning worked exactly as it was designed to work. Let us begin. Part 1. The exclusive truth claim as foundation. Every high-control religious system begins with the same foundation, and that foundation is an exclusive truth claim. This is not merely the belief that your religion is good, helpful, or meaningful. This is the belief that your religion is the singular authorized channel through which God operates on earth, and that all other paths are either incomplete, corrupted, or actively dangerous. For Jehovah's Witnesses, this claim is explicit and central. From the earliest stages of indoctrination, members are taught that Jehovah God has always worked through a visible organization on earth. In ancient times, that organization was Israel. In the 1st century, it was the early Christian congregation, and today, it is the organization led by the governing body in Warwick, New York. This is not presented as one interpretation among many. This is presented as established fact, as obvious as gravity, as unquestionable as the existence of God Himself. The publications reinforce this constantly. The organization is described as Jehovah's Visible Organization. The governing body is described as the faithful and discreet slave appointed by Christ Himself. The meetings, the ministry, the conventions, the publications are all described as spiritual food provided by Jehovah through His channel, and the implication is always the same. If you want a relationship with God, you need this organization. If you want to survive Armageddon, you need to be inside this ark. If you want everlasting life, you need to remain loyal to this system. For members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the claim takes a different form, but serves the same function. Mormons are taught that the original church established by Jesus Christ fell into apostasy after the death of the apostles. For nearly 2,000 years, the true church did not exist on earth. Then, in 1820, God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to a young man named Joseph Smith in upstate New York, and through him, the true church was restored. The priesthood authority was restored. The ordinances necessary for salvation were restored. The fullness of the gospel was restored. This is not presented as a nice story about spiritual revival. This is presented as the literal restoration of the only authorized church on the face of the earth. The LDS Church claims to hold the keys of the priesthood that are recognized by God. It claims to offer temple ordinances that are necessary for exaltation in the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. It claims to be led by prophets and apostles who receive direct revelation from God. And while Mormons are generally more polite about other religions than witnesses tend to be, the underlying claim is structurally identical. Full access to God's plan requires membership in this specific organization. Now, why does this matter psychologically? Why is the exclusive truth claim the foundation of the fear system, rather than just an interesting theological position? The answer is that once you genuinely believe you are inside the one true organization, your entire relationship with information changes. Every outside voice becomes automatically suspect. Every critic becomes potentially dangerous. Every former member becomes a warning rather than a person with a different perspective. You do not evaluate claims based on evidence. You evaluate claims based on source. If the source is inside the organization, it is trustworthy by definition. If the source is outside the organization, it is suspect by definition. This creates what psychologists call a closed epistemological system. Truth is not something you discover through open inquiry. Truth is something you receive through approved channels and protect from contamination. You are not a seeker. You are a guardian. Your job is not to find truth. Your job is to defend the truth you have already been given. And once that mental framework is in place, everything else becomes possible. Because a person who believes they are inside the only true organization will tolerate almost anything to stay there. They will suppress their doubts. They will avoid their questions. They will cut off family members. They will sacrifice careers, education, relationships, health, and happiness, all because they have been convinced that the alternative is spiritual death. The exclusive truth claim is not just a belief. It is the load-bearing wall of the entire control system. Remove it, and everything else collapses. That is why both organizations defend it so fiercely. That is why questioning the truth claim is treated as the most serious possible offense. That is why members are trained to feel physically uncomfortable, even entertaining the possibility that their organization might not be what it claims to be. Part 2. The criminalization of doubt. If the exclusive truth claim creates the walls of the prison, the criminalization of doubt installs the locks on the doors. In healthy intellectual and spiritual environments, doubt is treated as a normal part of human experience. Everyone doubts sometimes. Everyone has questions. Everyone encounters information that challenges what they previously believed. In healthy environments, this is not treated as a crisis or a moral failing. It is treated as an opportunity for growth, for learning, for deeper understanding. But in high-control religious systems, doubt is not treated as normal. Doubt is treated as dangerous. Doubt is treated as a symptom of spiritual weakness, pride, or even demonic influence. And this reframing has profound psychological consequences. Jehovah's Witnesses are explicitly warned against what the organization calls independent thinking. This phrase appears repeatedly in Watchtower publications, always in a negative context. Independent thinking is associated with Satan, who independently decided to rebel against God. Independent thinking is associated with Adam and Eve, who independently decided to eat the forbidden fruit. Independent thinking is associated with apostates, who independently decided to reject Jehovah's organization. The message is clear. Thinking for yourself, outside the boundaries approved by the organization, is spiritually dangerous. The practical effect of this teaching is that when a witness begins to have doubts, they do not experience those doubts as normal intellectual curiosity. They experience those doubts as a spiritual attack. They feel guilty for wondering. They feel ashamed for questioning. They feel frightened that they might be falling into Satan's trap. And so instead of exploring their doubts honestly, they suppress them. They push them down. They try to pray them away. They throw themselves into more meetings, more field service, more personal study of Watchtower publications, hoping that the doubts will disappear if they just demonstrate enough loyalty. The LDS Church approaches this slightly differently in its explicit rhetoric, but the psychological effect is remarkably similar. Mormon culture strongly discourages what might be called faithless questions, questions that are asked with an intent to challenge rather than an intent to believe. Members are encouraged to doubt their doubts before they doubt their faith. They are encouraged to stay on the covenant path, even when they struggle. They are encouraged to trust the prophets even when they do not understand. They are encouraged to focus on spiritual feelings rather than intellectual concerns. The practical effect is the same. A Mormon who begins having doubts about church history, about Book of Mormon archaeology, about prophetic authority, does not feel free to explore those doubts openly. They feel the weight of cultural pressure telling them that their doubts are a problem to be solved, not a signal to be followed. They are encouraged to pray, to fast, to attend the temple, to serve more diligently, all in the hope that the doubts will be resolved through increased spiritual effort rather than honest intellectual inquiry. In both systems, the individual learns that certain questions are not safe to ask. Not because anyone explicitly forbids the questions, but because the entire culture treats those questions as symptoms of spiritual disease. You learn to monitor your own thoughts. You learn to feel guilty for curiosity. You learn to interpret your intellectual discomfort as a sign that you need more faith, not more information. This is extraordinarily effective as a control mechanism because it makes external enforcement unnecessary. The organization does not need to punish you for doubting if you punish yourself. The organization does not need to silence your questions if you silence them first. You become your own thought police. You internalize the surveillance. You carry the prison with you wherever you go. And here is the tragic irony. Many people inside these systems believe they have freely chosen their faith. They believe they stay because they want to stay. They do not recognize that their choice has been systematically constrained by a psychological architecture that makes leaving feel impossible before they even consider it. They have been taught to fear their own minds. Part 3. Information control and the myth of safe sources. Once doubt has been criminalized, the next step is to control the information environment. If members are going to suppress their questions, they need to be given a framework for deciding which sources of information are acceptable and which are dangerous. Jehovah's Witnesses have one of the most explicit information control systems of any modern religious organization. Members are taught that spiritual food comes from Jehovah through the governing body. The publications produced by the organization are treated as the primary source of spiritual guidance. The JW Library app, the official website, the magazines, the books, the videos are all presented as wholesome, trustworthy, Jehovah-approved content. But the flip side of this teaching is equally important. Members are strongly warned against what the organization calls apostate material. This category includes any critical information about the organization, regardless of its accuracy or source. Former members who share their experiences are labeled apostates. Journalists who investigate the organization are treated as enemies. Academic researchers who study witness history or practices are viewed with suspicion. Even simply reading news articles about court cases involving the organization can be framed as spiritually dangerous. The Watchtower has compared apostate material to pornography, to poison, to spiritual garbage. Members are told that even brief exposure can damage their faith. They are told that apostates are mentally diseased. They are told that Satan uses critical information as a tool to draw people away from Jehovah. The message is unmistakable. Do not look, do not read, do not listen. Do not engage with any source that might contradict what we have told you. The LDS Church operates a somewhat different information control system, but the underlying pattern is the same. Mormon culture has long distinguished between faith-promoting and anti-Mormon material. Faith-promoting material confirms the Church's truth claims and inspires spiritual devotion. Anti-Mormon material challenges those claims and is therefore to be avoided. In recent years, as more information has become available through the internet, the Church has attempted to adapt to this reality. Official essays have been released addressing some controversial historical topics, but the framing remains consistent. Trust the Church's version. Be cautious about outside sources. Remember that critics have their own agendas. Stay focused on what builds faith rather than what destroys it. Members who research church history from non-approved sources are often viewed with concern by their families and fellow members. They may be warned that they are on a dangerous path. They may be encouraged to speak with their bishop rather than continuing to research independently. They may be reminded that spiritual witnesses are more reliable than historical evidence. The message, again, is clear. Some information is safe, and some information is dangerous, and we will tell you which is which. The psychological effect of this information control is profound. Members can feel extremely well informed while actually being systematically isolated from contradictory evidence. They read constantly, study constantly, discuss constantly, but only within approved boundaries. They develop sophisticated arguments for their position, but only arguments that the organization has provided. They feel confident in their conclusions, but that confidence rests on a foundation of curated information. And perhaps worst of all, both systems can make members feel virtuous for avoiding evidence. Avoiding critical information is framed as protecting your faith, guarding your testimony, staying spiritually safe. The member who refuses to read a news article about organizational abuse is not being willfully ignorant. They are being loyal. The member who dismisses a former member's testimony without listening is not being closed-minded. They are being wise. This is the genius of the control system. It transforms intellectual isolation into moral achievement. It makes ignorance feel like faithfulness. It takes what would be recognized as manipulation in any other context and dresses it up as spiritual protection. Part 4. The Catastrophization of Leaving. If you want to understand why people stay in high-control religions even when they no longer believe, you need to understand how these systems frame the act of leaving. Leaving is not presented as a neutral choice. Leaving is not presented as a valid option for people who simply disagree. Leaving is presented as catastrophe. It is presented as spiritual suicide. It is presented as the destruction of everything that matters. For Jehovah's Witnesses, leaving means losing God's protection. The organization teaches that Jehovah protects his people inside the organization, and that those who leave are stepping out from under that protection into a world controlled by Satan. Leaving means facing Armageddon without Jehovah's help. Leaving means losing the hope of everlasting life. Leaving means spiritual death, but the consequences are not only theological. They are social and relational. Jehovah's Witnesses practice a form of institutional shunning. Those who are disfellowshipped or who formally disassociate are to be treated as if they no longer exist by their fellow members. Family relationships may continue in limited form under certain circumstances, but even those interactions are discouraged and governed by organizational policy. Former members often describe losing their entire social world overnight. Parents stop speaking to children. Siblings become strangers. Lifelong friends disappear without a word. This is not incidental. This is a deliberate feature of the control system. When your entire community is connected to the organization, the threat of losing that community becomes a chain that binds you even when belief has faded. You stay not because you want to stay, but because you cannot bear the cost of leaving. You perform faith because authenticity is too expensive. For Latter-day Saints, the consequences of leaving are framed differently but can be equally devastating. The Church teaches that temple ordinances, including celestial marriage, are necessary for the highest degree of salvation. Families can be sealed together for eternity, but that sealing is conditional on faithfulness. When a member leaves, they are understood to be breaking their covenants, potentially jeopardizing their eternal place in the family unit. For members who have been sealed in the temple, who have made promises about eternal families, who have built their entire understanding of the afterlife around being together forever with their loved ones, the thought of leaving carries an almost unbearable weight. It feels like destroying not just your present life, but your eternal destiny. It feels like choosing to be separated from your family forever. The social consequences can be severe as well, though they vary more widely depending on family and geographic culture. Some former Mormons maintain close relationships with their believing family members. Others experience significant distance, disappointment, or even formal estrangement. What is nearly universal is the experience of being reclassified. You are no longer seen as someone who made a valid choice. You are seen as someone who fell away, who was deceived, who chose the world over the gospel. In both systems, the message is the same. Leaving is not just wrong. Leaving is destruction. Leaving is loss. Leaving is the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. And so people stay. They stay even when they have stopped believing. They stay even when they are miserable. They stay even when the cognitive dissonance is tearing them apart inside. They stay because the exit has been rigged with explosives. They stay because they have been taught that everything they love will be destroyed if they walk through that door. Part 5. Conditional belonging and love as leverage. One of the most painful aspects of high-control religious systems is the way they weaponize community and love. These organizations often provide genuine community. That is part of what makes them attractive. That is part of what makes them hard to leave. The relationships inside the organization are real. The friendships are real. The sense of belonging is real. When you are inside, you are surrounded by people who care about you, who support you, who share your values and your worldview. But here is what members rarely recognize until they try to leave. That belonging is conditional. That love comes with requirements. That community is a leash as much as it is a gift. In Jehovah's Witnesses, the conditional nature of belonging is institutionalized through the shunning policy. You are loved and welcomed as long as you remain a member in good standing. The moment you are disfellowshipped, the moment you formally disassociate, the moment you are publicly identified as someone who has left the organization, that love is withdrawn. People who hugged you last week will not make eye contact with you this week. People who called you their closest friend will treat you as a spiritual danger. Your standing in the community is entirely dependent on your continued loyalty to the organization. For Latter-day Saints, the conditionality is often less formally institutionalized, but still pervasive. Your standing in the community is tied to your visible participation. If you stop attending, people notice. If you stop accepting callings, people talk. If you remove your name from the church records, your relationships shift. You may still be loved, but you will be loved differently. You will be loved as someone to bring back, someone to worry about, someone to pray for. The category has changed. The belonging has changed. This conditionality creates an incredibly powerful form of social control. When your entire social world is connected to your religious participation, when all your friends share your faith, when all your family expects your loyalty, when every meaningful relationship in your life is mediated by the organization, the thought of leaving becomes not just theologically terrifying but socially impossible. You are not just worried about God's disapproval. You are worried about your mother's tears. You are worried about your children's confusion. You are worried about your best friend's silence. You are worried about being alone in a world you have been taught to fear. And so you stay, not because you believe, because you belong. And belonging has become survival. Part 6. Identity, fusion and the terror of self-loss. Perhaps the deepest layer of the control system is the way these organizations merge your identity with your membership. You are not just someone who attends meetings. You are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. You are not just someone who goes to church. You are a Latter-day Saint. You are not just someone who holds certain beliefs. You are a member of the one true organization. The religion is not something you have. It is something you are. This identity fusion develops gradually over years of participation. Every meeting reinforces it. Every convention celebrates it. Every field service experience confirms it. Every temple recommend interview validates it. You build your sense of self around your religious membership. You understand your place in the cosmos through the lens of your organization. You interpret your past, present, and future according to the narrative your religion provides. When this fusion is complete, leaving the organization does not feel like changing your mind about a set of beliefs. Leaving feels like dying. Leaving feels like killing the person you have always been. Leaving feels like obliterating everything you know about yourself and starting over from nothing. Former members often describe this experience in visceral terms. They talk about feeling like they are going insane. They talk about panic attacks. They talk about suicidal thoughts. They talk about not knowing who they are anymore. This is not weakness. This is not melodrama. This is the predictable psychological consequence of having your identity systematically merged with an organization and then attempting to separate. The fear of self-loss keeps people trapped, even when every conscious part of their mind knows they need to leave. They know the religion is not true. They know the organization has caused harm. They know they are suffering. But they cannot bring themselves to take the step, because taking the step feels like stepping off a cliff into nothingness. Part 7. The demonization of the outside world. The final component of the fear system is the persistent framing of the outside world as dangerous, corrupt, and spiritually hostile. Jehovah's Witnesses are taught that the world is under Satan's control. This is not a metaphor. This is literal doctrine. The institutions of the world, the governments, the businesses, the entertainment, the education systems, all of it is understood to be part of a satanic system that will be destroyed at Armageddon. Worldly people might seem nice, but they are ultimately aligned with God's enemies. Worldly pleasures might seem attractive, but they are traps. Worldly knowledge might seem valuable, but it is corrupted by human thinking. This framing makes the outside world feel genuinely terrifying. If you leave the organization, you are not just joining another religious tradition or becoming secular. You are stepping into enemy territory. You are entering Satan's domain. You are putting yourself in spiritual danger. Latter-day Saints have a somewhat more nuanced relationship with the broader world, but the boundary between inside and outside is still carefully maintained. The world is often described as increasingly wicked, as falling into moral decay, as rejecting God's standards. Members are encouraged to be in the world, but not of it. Worldly influences are frequently warned against. Worldly values are contrasted with gospel values. The covenant path is presented as the safe path, the bright path, while the alternatives are presented as leading to unhappiness and spiritual darkness. This demonization of the outside world serves a crucial function in the control system. It makes leaving feel not just costly but frightening. It makes the outside seem not just different but dangerous. It ensures that even if you escape the theological arguments, even if you see through the social pressure, even if you recognize the manipulation, you will still hesitate, because out there seems scarier than staying. Part 8. The Path to Awakening. After everything I have described, you might wonder whether anyone ever escapes these systems. The answer is yes. People do wake up. People do leave. People do rebuild their lives. But it rarely happens the way you might expect. People rarely wake up because of a single devastating fact. They rarely wake up because someone argues them out of their beliefs. They rarely wake up because of a dramatic confrontation or a powerful sermon from the other side. People wake up through accumulation. They wake up because the small inconsistencies pile up until they can no longer be ignored. They wake up because they notice that their leaders are protected while ordinary members are blamed. They wake up because they see the gap between what the organization preaches and what the organization practices. They wake up because they realize they are afraid of researching their own religion, and that fear starts to feel like a clue rather than a protection. They wake up because they meet former members who are happy. They wake up because they discover that the horror stories about life after leaving are not true. They wake up because they read an article or watch a video or have a conversation that plants a seed of doubt they cannot unplant. And at some point, often after years of internal struggle, the question becomes unavoidable. If this is the truth, why does it need fear to survive? Truth does not need you to be terrified. Truth does not need to control your information environment. Truth does not need to threaten you with social destruction. Truth does not need to make you afraid of your own questions. Control needs those things. Truth does not. Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons are not the same religion. Their theologies differ substantially. Their cultures differ. Their histories differ. Their public reputations differ. A witness attending a Kingdom Hall and a Mormon attending sacrament meeting are having genuinely different experiences in many ways. But the fear architecture is the same. The psychological machinery that keeps people trapped operates on the same principles. The mechanisms of control follow the same blueprint. Claim exclusive access to truth, criminalize doubt, control information, catastrophize leaving, make belonging conditional, merge identity with membership, demonize the outside world. These mechanisms work together to create a psychological prison that can hold people for decades, that can be passed down through generations, that can make intelligent, educated, compassionate people stay in systems that are hurting them, defending organizations that are lying to them, and fearing freedom that would heal them. If you are watching this from inside one of these systems, I am not asking you to leave your religion today. I am not asking you to reject everything you have ever believed. I am not asking you to become an atheist or join a different church or embrace a life of hedonism and chaos. I am only asking you to notice. Notice if you feel afraid of certain questions. Notice if you feel guilty for curiosity. Notice if your love for people in your community feels conditional on your continued performance of belief. Notice if the thought of leaving produces panic that seems disproportionate to simply changing your mind about religion. Those feelings are data. Those feelings are telling you something. They are not telling you that your religion is true. They are telling you that your conditioning is intact. The moment you can say, I am allowed to ask questions, the locks begin to open, not from God, from control, and that distinction makes all the difference.